All right. So today I'm doing a video on a more detailed build of how I went from the factory airbox to a pod filter. And I had a viewer actually ask me to do a detailed video on this, so this is for him or her, whoever asked. But I figured it'll probably benefit everybody who wants to look at doing this upgrade. So when you get your standard golf cart, you have this big giant airbox, and it's bolted in facing this way with the golf cart. So the front's out that way, the airbox is oriented like this. And the first thing you're going to do is take the lid off. You're going to take your air filter out, and that leaves you this. And let me go ahead and explain here why I wanted to do this upgrade. Not only did buying a new air filter kit cost more than going to a pod filter, this is also more restrictive, and the way it manages the breather hose, which comes out of the engine into this little nipple right here, when it would catch a little bubble of oil, or it would burp a little oil, it would shoot out and spray into this cavity here. And you can see that this air filter here is just for big debris if it were to make it through all this. But then it just pooled. I had a lot of oil in here, and that comes from one, overfilling the engine, which is not good. But if you go over a bump and shake the golf cart, if a little bubble comes up, it's going to go through the hose and spurt out into here and then go down into your engine. And with it being a fuel injected engine and on the smaller cc size, having a little sprit of oil go in with the air fuel mixture can really it can cause it to bog or cut out. It's just not great for the engine. So once you get those removed, sitting in the golf cart like this, the front of the golf cart is facing that way, you're going to have two of these 10mm bolts that are back here in these two holes, and I'll show you where you can find those on here. So looking down on the engine, it's going to be here, kind of in the middle of the starter, right here and right here. So that's where you can find those two bolts. And then you have the air box, and then you have, going from the box itself, let me grab this, underneath you're going to have this little 90, or straight down to a 90-degree into the plenum. Now you have three bolts that screw into the bottom of this here, and I left them on. Those are another 10mm. So if I remember correctly, I undid the rear 10mm bolts, and then I reached up underneath and was able to get these out, which left the riser, I guess the stack, on the plenum. And that has two 12mm cap nuts, they're little flange nuts there. So it has 5 10mm, 2 12. So unscrew the back first, then these three, and then you can get at this a lot easier with the 2 12s on the front here. When you unbolt this, the top of this flange will have an O-ring, and then these aluminum inserts so you can't crush and crack the plastic. And it also has this drop down neck that goes inside to overlap on that connection. And that is, I'm not exactly sure why they designed it like this, but it will actually help in the future, and I'll explain this later, if you wanted to re-engineer this and go back to the factory airbox. So when you take this off, screw these back in here to keep them for later. Go ahead and take these two rear 10mm bolts, throw those in there, put this back on, put that back on. Store that if you want to, if you want to go put this back on the golf cart, if you don't want to use an air pod. So we can put all that aside, and we're left with this guy. And like I said, you take the two 12mm bolts or nuts off, and it slides off the plenum, and then you have it in your hand freely. Now, this is what I modified to get the pod filter. So this flange is molded, and I'm doing this to kind of just represent it. It's molded to the top like this, and I used a hacksaw to cut it flush against the triangular flange here. I didn't go clean through. I would cut about a third in, rotate it, cut another third, rotate it, cut another third, and it allowed for a very clean, flat cut, so you don't get an angled cut on it at all. Just take your time with that. The cleaner the job you do, the better the results are going to be, and reverse engineering, it'll be a lot easier. So then, once you have that off, I actually store it in there. Now you're left with this, and this is just the Yamaha intake, I guess from the airbox to the plenum, just a little connector, and it is a 1.5 inch in diameter. And I went on eBay, found a little pod filter, 1.5 inch in diameter. I want to say, I think I saw like a 37 to 42 millimeter is what they're after. It's 1.5 inch. That's all I can say. That is right there, and it's nice and smooth, so you can get a clean seal on that from the air filter. And this also allows you to do a snorkel if you didn't want it inside the engine bay. You might be able to use some 1.5 inch tubing and bring it up underneath here, or I don't know, maybe you could even bring it up underneath the canopy. You know, you could have a snorkel. Be kind of cool. So you're left with this cut off 1.5 inch in diameter, and it is perfectly flat on the bottom. That's how it came. That's not me cutting it or anything like that. It's perfectly flat. Now, since the engine had the breather hose go into the front here, I had to figure out a way to get that engine breather hose back into the intake, so that way any of the vapors and any of the blow-by or compression that goes into the engine case can vent, and I want it to vent back into the intake. So I went to Advance Auto, down that aisle, the ricer aisle, to the intake area, and you can find all their black, blue, and red air intakes, and they sell a little kit that allows you to apply or drill your own vacuum hose ports into like an intake manifold or anywhere you need to. And it comes with a couple drill bits and the proper size bit to drill a hole. I forget what they call it. It's like a cup bit or something like that. And a bunch of these grommets that you can put in of varying in size, and a bunch of male-to-male hose couplers. So it'll be this back to back, these male end hose connectors. So since it's flat on the bottom, instead of drilling into a curved side where that may not be able to seal very well, the flat bottom was perfect, and it goes straight through. I mean, it's almost like they planned for you to do this, Yamaha that is. So cut the hole, put the grommet in, and I picked the right male-to-male coupler to go from the hose to the correct diameter to go into that grommet, and it's a nice tight seal. So nothing's leaking, nothing's dripping, there's no air being sucked in through the edge that can get past the air filter. And that takes care of this. So then you can put your pod filter on, slide it back on, and put the two 12mm nuts on, and you're done. Now, as far as the case breather hose, it comes out of the valve cover here. It just went traditionally into the big giant air box, and it was a short hose. I mean, it was probably only about 6 inches. And you could do that if you don't want to do this oil catch can. If you want it to go straight into the bottom of the intake, you can. I would probably do a loop in it like this, so that if any oil came through going from here straight to the bottom of the intake, you could see it, and it would go to the low part of the hose and catch it a little bit. So that way you can kind of see if there's oil just being sucked up, like an excessive amount of oil sucked up. But this was a kit, again, off of eBay. It's cheap, makes customization very easy on a golf cart. But let me see if I can get in here. Yamaha has this bracket on the G29, and it serves no purpose for this model. I think this was originally where they would put a pull choke for the engine, the carbureted models, but this being a fuel injected engine, you don't need that. So I used some self-tapping screws, making sure not to over penetrate into the body. So it bolted that, and it's solid as a rock. I mean, you really have to push on this thing to get it to move. And then this kit came with these little brackets, the aluminum can. It's got a little, I guess you could say a viewing tube to see how full it is if you have an excessive amount of oil coming in. And then on the very bottom, there's a finger screw that you can drain the whole can if it gets full. And it came with this hosing. So it's a nice kit. I think it was like $15, $20. Really nice and easy. And I explained in another video that you have your evap system from the gas tank goes into the breather hose, and it goes back into the intake, and it takes any of those vapors and puts it into the engine instead of letting it go into the atmosphere. And in the video I had explained, the past video that I did on this, I explained that I wanted it after the catch can so that there was no gas vapor sitting in this. I wanted it to go from the evap system straight into the engine. But that's it. A little handiwork. You kind of have to commit to cutting that off and just be confident. I know you could probably do it. If you can turn a wrench, you can do it. Now, as far as reverse engineering goes, I was looking at this. You would have the flange go on here. This should be one piece, and it slides on. If you ever wanted to put this back on, or let's just say I wanted to put this back on, I can put the two screws back here, and I could either find a way to glue this on, probably using like steel putty, where I can reinforce the edge that it makes, the 90-degree edge there, or I could leave it as is, and you see how it slides and has a nice tight fit going onto this neck. So I might be able to find a way to seal this so I don't have to worry about this flange. Yeah, we got a weather warning. It's North Carolina, hurricane season, starting off early. So if I wanted to put this air filter back on, you know, you can see that it would still line up. It would still be able to reach down into this and probably seal this off. It would be a little bit cheesy. It would be not as well finished, but you could reverse engineer it to put this back on. But let me talk about one more thing about why I went to the pod filter too. So when this is all sealed up, this is your intake. This is where all the fresh air comes in, and that is 1 inch by inch. So 1 square inch for air to come in, come through this filter, come through this filter, and let me put it on here. It'll rise up, hit the cap, come over, go down through here, through, and I believe this is a 1 inch hole into the engine. So that's a lot of restriction. That's a lot of air, a lot of material sitting up here to go from 1 inch square, 1 inch tube, when really you've got 1.5 inch intake. So that is a big performance upgrade. And I did not feel, the cart wasn't any faster, but it felt more torquey when the engine was initially kicking up. So in the low RPMs, it could really breathe. And with this being on here, it makes the golf cart a bit louder. You hear more of a throaty pull of air through this pod filter. So this kind of acted as a sound insulator. So if you want a little extra sound out of your golf cart, this it makes the golf cart a little louder. This keeps it quiet. So restrictive, quiet, a little bit louder, a little bit more torque off of this. So $7, a little handiwork. I think the kit for this was maybe $10. You'll find it in the back. It's hanging up above the air filters. And you can do it. But hopefully this was a video detailed enough for the person asking, and I appreciate you asking. This is why I'm doing this. I want this to be informational for the people who want to know. So that's how I did the intake. I do have one thing I want to share with you guys. It is currently being prototyped. It's a project that a buddy of mine is working on, and I've been a little bit a part of it, and we are going to I don't want to reveal it just yet. We're going to prototype it on the golf cart, but I'll give you a little sneak peek of what it is. Yep. So there's going to be a big video coming to show how I get that accessory on the golf cart, and y'all, it's going to be legendary. I cannot tell you how pumped I am to get my hands on a prototype. It's going to be great. If there was one accessory that you could get for this golf cart, if you could only pick one accessory, it would be that. So that video will probably come out in a few weeks, 3-4 weeks, and it's going to be a big one. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. But y'all have a good one. Stay safe.